Good morning, and thank you for coming to the Policy Committee meeting of November 3rd. We have a very full agenda. We have lots of things to go through. We have community members, and what is it? We'll be recording this and also live streaming it. So anyone can watch it at any time. All right, I'll pass it off to Megan.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's Friday, and we're all lucky to be here for policy, right? And excited to get us started with this agenda. We have a few items to I guess, get us started that are policies that are proposed for adoption that we've reviewed on prior occasions and were passed as first readings last month. We can start with policy 004, which is the formulation and adoption of policies. The purpose of these revisions is to create some efficiencies in our process, but allow for revisions that would be described as non-substantive, that wouldn't prevent us from moving an otherwise ready policy to a first or second reading. So those were memorialized largely in paragraph A on that first page. So that's the revision that we've already discussed, and it's ready for adoption. Any questions?
Are there any questions or comments about this policy?
I did have a question, not on the policy, but on the AR, well, not the AR, the local board procedure. Does it matter, just in that very first paragraph, that we do sometimes hold meetings in the auditorium in the high school? Like if we're going to be specific.
Are you in
Are you in-
04?
Hello.
You're in the,
Oh, I'm sorry.
What was that?
I'm ahead of you.
She's right on top of it. On B, on page 3, it refers to see section H for hearings of members of the public. I think it's section F.
okay. So I caught that mistake, but we're okay with 04, because that was, you moved on to 07, correct?
Yes, by accident, I moved on to 07 also.
So everyone is excited about 007, so I'm assuming 004 looks good, and so.
I just want to note this is both of our very last policy committee meeting.
Oh.
So it might be a way where like,
I would think you'd want to prolong it just to enjoy the last few moments of policy. So should we move on to 007? And I had noted that change, that should be F as opposed to H on the bottom of page 3. And again, just for introductory purposes, 007 is also ready for adoption. We had added some definitions. We moved some of the details that were previously in policy to the procedures that begin on page 8. And there were a few additional language changes that allow for, that part of that discussion was around the start time for meetings. So that language that has been updated reflects that flexibility to establish times and dates. And there was a question about location, right? So if you don't mind.
yes, I don't mind re-asking. I was just curious, under the procedures, on the very first point, that it changes it to specifically say that we are here in the DAO, but we do sometimes hold meetings in the auditorium if we, always the October meetings there, and then if we expect a large crowd. So I don't know if that makes a difference.
It says as shall normally be held. We could also say periodically, though, that meetings may also be held the other place. We could say that if you want. Yeah, just add that in there.
Or we can say unless noted otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so just add unless noted otherwise at the very end, unless advertised otherwise.
Does the normally still need to be in there, or does that make it redundant with that preface?
It doesn't. No, we don't need it anymore. Because the unless advertised otherwise would refer both to the third Monday of the month and also to the location.
Okay, are there other questions or comments on 007 AR and policy?
Okay, to move forward.
On page 12, when it talks about the following actions require the affirmative votes of majority, I guess it would apply, my question would apply to the two-thirds as well. Are these an exhaustive list? In other words, it doesn't require any type of catch-all provision at the end? That was my only question.
They are actually exhaustive, yeah. These are, and to be clear, the second one especially, when it says affirmative vote of a majority of the full number, that means 5 votes, no matter how many board members are present. Every other vote that isn't listed here, if you have a quorum, it's just a majority of the quorum. So if you only had 7 board members, it could be 4.
Ally, do you have any questions or comments about this policy? Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on. We will mark 004 and 007 ready for adoption. The final one that we're looking at for adoption today is policy 804, which is on page 17 of your packet, school day for students. The change that we discussed last time and have discussed on many occasions is that change to the school start times that we identified as effective September 2024. So that is what is reflected in the update for policy 804.
So this would be the final step in the setting, in the change of the start times for next September? The formalization of the,
All right, great. Moving right along,
Hey,
with a
Megan.
oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I missed something in 007 I had meant.
I'm just fixated on 007 today, so we'll keep going back to it, yeah.
So can we go back for 1 second? I'm sorry. I thought it was in a different one. On the use of recording devices, I wondered specifically about the procedure listed in D. That said, any board member, district employer, or other person who believes they've been defamed at a board meeting should notify the board president or superintendent immediately to provide the board president the opportunity to edit the video recording from that meeting. I wondered about just changing that language to be a little bit more neutral about actions that may be taken and or what the process, so even to just say defamed at a board meeting should notify the superintendent of their concern. My concern is like, this language kind of alludes to that someone will do something. There might be someone that says something that the board president or the superintendent doesn't agree with taking off, and does that put us at liability for back and forth on media or other concerns?
I don't think you wouldn't be liability. You're under no obligation to record your meetings in the first place. So you're not under any obligation to video record your board meetings. There's no law requiring it. It's only been, some places still don't do it, I think. So there's no entitlement for somebody's comment to be rebroadcast. So if it gets, if the district, if you look at, if the process for editing a video gets utilized, it's not like you could get sued for that. Now, having said that, your concern is fine. You can, if you're concerned about creating an expectation, I think your comment is good. Should notify the board president or superintendent immediately, period.
Okay,
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay. I don't know how others feel about it. It just stood out to me as something that could potentially create an expectation of community members and the board that we didn't want to.
Is it, and I think you answered it this way, but I just wanted to clarify, is it, not that this really happens very often, but if someone believed that they were defamed, our republicizing it would be, if we had notice of defamation and then we publicized it, isn't there a potential cause of action there?
That's the concern, you can, if you republish a defamation, knowing that it's defamation, you can be liable. The district could then be liable for republishing or rebroadcasting a defamatory statement. So that's why, I think that's why that language was in there to begin with. But at the same token, by notifying immediately, then, so that language is really more in there for the board president and superintendent to say, okay, that's why we're asking people to tell us, to give us a chance to edit it if we need to. But they would know that anyway.
Yeah, with the previous clauses that talk about the editing, that is the responsibility of the district, cover that, so that if we, okay.
Yeah, I think so.
And my only last comment on that is, we have a lovely relationship with our superintendent and board president. Might we want to just name the superintendent, not the board president, in case there was a situation that there was disagreement of whether it should be included or not, given some of the arduous nature of comments that are more and more made to the public? In terms of
A board member feeling defamed or community
the
member?
public, like if the community came and said, let's say the superintendent and the board president did not get along or were in disagreement about a key issue. A community member could say to the board president, that should be removed, I don't want that being shared, or that's not appropriate. The superintendent could say it is appropriate, and then there's who's making the decision.
So it's a question of there being two people?
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
With like governance, like in alignment with policy and us, and our role as board members, should it not be the superintendent who would then propose if it became a higher elevation? I might be way in the weeds on this. I'm just thinking of some of the
It
things.
states somewhere that the videos are owned by the district.
Right.
Not So doesn't that make more sense the superintendent has?
Well, you can delegate to whomever you wish the ability to act on advice of solicitor and determining in their sole discretion which portions, if any, will not be broadcast. Originally, some people were saying, well, shouldn't the full board make that decision? And the problem is, you don't have that much time. You have, if somebody says something defamatory and you're ready to rebroadcast something, tells you on a Tuesday that something was defamatory and you got to rebroadcast by Wednesday or take it down by Wednesday, you don't necessarily have time to convene an entire board conversation. So that's why historically, it's been the board president who's had the sole discretion on whether to make the call on editing. That's the history behind it. You could make it whoever you want.
Just one question, just to follow up on that. There's nothing in this paragraph about keeping a record of it or in making, or what,
Gee,
under what circumstances is the determination made that portions should be edited? Of course, keep in mind that the original always has to be maintained, right?
correct, under G.
So how's that determination made?
Under C2?
Under D?
No. The editing, the criteria for editing is C. All D does is basically, truthfully, D could just also be part C if you wanted it to be. It could be Roman numeral 4 if that makes it more clear, but
Oh, I
C
see,
is
I
the
see.
criteria
Yeah,
for
I see.
editing.
I got it, yep, okay.
Oh, that's a good idea, Ken. I wonder if you make that 4, make it Roman numeral 4, make it Roman numeral 2, because Roman numeral 3 pretty much sums up what the subsequent procedure would be if something was reported, right?
So you're saying convert D into Roman numeral 4?
If others
IV.
agree.
Yeah, that seems
Okay.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And then everything else gets,
I still think that lingers the opportunity to edit the video recording might lay a false expectation, but,
you could take it out because you have it covered other places.
okay.
So change D to little IV and take out that to provide the board president, and then everything else gets relettered. Okay.
Nothing more on 007 for me.
I think I know it's
Yeah.
And what was the conclusion on, should we board president or superintendent? One advantage to having an option is it might depend on who made the statement as to who somebody wants to tell.
Okay.
Somebody feels that either the board president or the superintendent are the ones that defamed them, they're going to want another person to tell.
Great point, yeah.
Is there a place where, I know we've talked about this before with definitions, is there somewhere that defines what defamation is?
I wouldn't want to define it in a regulation because it's going to be whatever the evolving case law says it is. The best we can do is the provision about acting on advice of solicitor, so.
Mel, anything on 007?
Right. We'll revisit 007 at the end of the meeting, too.
If we have time at the end, is that what you said? That's what I was thinking. So-
Just in case everything
Just so you know.
All right, we okay?
All right, so we're moving back to 151.
Well, except to shake things up a little bit, I'm going to ask if it's okay with the committee to move 151 to a discussion item because we have approved the change that we were looking to make initially, which was around name, image, and likeness, and that's been moved to a second reading. And we talked about, again, the idea of broadening this policy to encompass the extracurriculars and athletics together. So there's a discussion maybe we can have, and there's some draft language in the packet under discussion items. So there's nothing to do right now with 151, in my opinion, because we've made the change that we needed to make for the moment, knowing that there's additional work to do. And because we have some special guests here, I thought, making sure we had time for transportation discussion today, that if it's okay with the committee, we proceed in that fashion. Okay. So with transportation, which starts in your packet on page 45, the shift that we have already presented is taking portions of the policy and moving them to the administrative regulation. In doing that, we talked about some objectives in terms of revisions, and you're welcome to join now or later when the questions start, Aldous and Katie, but the objectives in terms of creating some efficiencies and in service of our changes to start time, knowing that we still have a pretty tight corridor between our high school and middle school runs, that we want to make sure that we really maximize efficiency there, so we don't end up in situations, again, with that competing pressure of having a driver shortage that is real. What are ways that allow us to ensure that we're not running buses late or just up to the bell on a consistent basis? We'd rather avoid that, and we think some of these options will give us a little more breathing room. Again, larger, or, bigger picture was about the healthy start time adjustment. So some of those strategies that we've talked about here and talked about internally, related to the walk zone expansion, opt-out, a more formalized opt-out program, what probably needs a name program, which is in exchange for a parking pass, you aren't getting a seat on the bus program. And then finally, one of the bigger shifts in this policy was to move all of the recording device information into our safety and security policy, so that we don't look like we have two different procedures for bus videos and building videos, because basically half of this administrative regulation used to be about video. And so it made sense, because those procedures are largely the same, other than who initially has the access to pull the video. So that was, again, to create some efficiencies and operational, efficiencies, and also clarity, I think, hopefully to the public and internally about what that procedure looks like ultimately. So that's the summary of our work, and we can, again, all of the changes really are to the administrative regulation that starts on page 46. And again, it's based on conversations we had here, and also the follow-up conversations and studies that we've been doing internally with what we believe is a nice balance of impact and efficiency.
Okay, are there any questions about these changes?
In the AR, I have some questions. On page 49, talking about, and specific to that, if you got a parking pass, that you then are saying, I don't want my seat anymore. So the parking passes would then need to be distributed, like in June. Can there be leeway for students who, currently, I believe you have to have your license to be able to apply, and so can there be leeway for kids that might get their license over the summer, right? It might be a birth date issue, it might be a timing issue, right?
To get a pass?
To get a parking pass.
So that's a different procedure here, but I think,
Understood. I guess I'm just putting it out there for whoever is the person who will be responsible for the parking passes, that's something to think about, right? That you just need to have your license in the first day of school, maybe, yeah, right? So, and that there just might be some kids that miss that. And also, I might not use the word choose, because there are a lot of kids at Lower Marion High School that would choose a parking pass if they could get one.
Qualify.
Yeah, like qualify, apply, something like that.
Can I add something to yours? Somebody suggested to me, and I'm wondering if we've ever considered it, that we give priority, that students who agree that they're going to carpool with other students, get priority for parking passes. Have we ever considered that?
I may have had a conversation with that same person, and I actually think that that's quite difficult.
Yeah.
Because you might say, in the fall, I play soccer, I'm gonna carpool with my soccer teammates, and then come winter season, and Science Olympiad kicks up, and all of a sudden, that person I'm carpooling with is doing Science Olympiad, and I'm not, so I'm no longer a carpooler.
Yeah.
But I just think it becomes very tricky.
It's tricky logistics. I mean, it can't really be based upon, it's more like neighborhood-based, I guess, more than activity-based or
Well,
something.
neighborhood-based, but the activities are a key piece of that, right? Because
Yes, yeah. And who's going to?
I would just add generally, relative to this provision, I'm looking at oldest and Katie, that if circumstances changed and a student could no longer drive for whatever reason, they would be eligible, sort of like in line with that opt-out program, to request a seat on the bus. So it doesn't say it here, and maybe we do make note of that as a cross-reference to an opt-out process, but just in case that question comes up or someone has that question, if your circumstances changed and you then needed a seat on the bus, we would accommodate that. If you gave up your parking pass and no longer needed us.
Right. And I'm just noting this, because it's a comment I've heard, so I just want to put it out there, that there are parents who want their kid to have a parking pass, but if it snows, they no longer want their child using, they want their kid on the bus, and so I think that, that's not going to be an option, and I think we need to be clear about that, and I think, I've been thinking a lot about what Anna had said at the last meeting, we can't have our cake and eat it too, basically, was what you said. And it's true, because I was pushing back on some of your suggestions, and you said that. I'm like, no, you're right. We have to. And so I think we need to be very clear, this is a consequence of that. Okay, that's all.
So we'll change choose to elect and qualify.
A lot of words to get to that.
Starting at the top of the policy, I just wondered about mirroring the language that's outlined in school bus to the other definitions above. So the school bus definition uses primary instead of elementary, so I just wondered about making that adjustment
Where are you looking?
on the definitions piece.
Got it.
Everyone's okay with that one? Okay. Then on page 50, I was just curious about this is probably later in how transportation and whoever comes up with the procedure, just a downstream implication that I was thinking of is when we talk about the district will issue an opt-out form no later than June 30th. In order to plan accordingly, Katie and all this, is there a time frame that we would want to put in here that we want it back? And just noting June 30th is a little bit late, and also I get this opt-out form for my child that does not reside or to sign in. And it's always in the flurry of end of school activities, and I've almost forgotten. And so just wanting to be sure that parents really are cued into this and that we get it to be what we might need. Welcome, Aldous and Katie.
Earlier, we basically tried to come up with date that we can work with, but that's not too early also. So, we can't go later in a date, but if decide to go earlier, it's helpful for us to know earlier. But it's kind of, we were trying to be understanding that people may not think about it in December of this school year, about the next school year.
For planning, we start planning in March, and for us to be, like, for it to be useful data, it would be helpful by the end of June, because that's when we start crunching down the buses to make it as efficient as possible. So if people are opting out later than June, then we've already counted them as a seat on the bus.
So I wonder if we adjust this to, that you would issue the form in March and put some language, like characterizing that, and so that we could then publish to parents and do a campaign about getting it in. Because I read it as like, that's when it'll be first available.
Yeah, and I would add that we talked about, it's sort of an arbitrary date to give us some flexibility as we design, like exactly when we want to send it out, and there would be a plan together with communication, and we talked about after this meeting, wherever we are, we want to get together and say, lay out, like, what does this mean for families, so we can start communicating that together with the Smart Start. I don't have a problem saying March. I think that, but because it was new, I was trying to give us flexibility before we say, we're going to definitely issue it in March in the event that.
Yeah. Megan, maybe along those lines, just align, an offering could be to just align it to the school year, and then you guys can decide when you can get it out. So then year over year, it doesn't hold you to it.
Right, or even just more broadly say, we'll issue an opt-out form and not even put a date, like,
Yeah.
the district will issue this, and then
Yeah.
we have procedures or a plan that aligns with that,
Yeah.
that we publicize annually.
Not to be nitpicky, I would put a date even to hold yourself to communicating with parents, or as we share it with parents, for them to know what to expect in planning transportation. But I would think that it's perfectly realistic to say in alignment with the school years or last day of student attendance, or however you want to frame it.
I think I would be concerned that parents, if there wasn't a date, the parents would be like, but it could have been later. Like,
Yeah.
You can put the date on the form, like return by so-and-so date.
Yeah.
I think the idea is to collecting it electronically, the data, that it comes in through the Power School, that we have also the information who requested it, because we have split custody situations, we're going to have to clarify if it's one parent or both. And I think the form technically would be open once it's
Great.
implemented, it's all the time. You can opt out of transportation anytime. What we asking is to lock down the time when you can back up then, because in September we can't adjust runs, because in June we took students off, and then in September we putting them back. So there is a lockout time for opting in, but opting out can go throughout a year. And like, if they decide to opt out later, that's fine with us too. It may help us, may not, but.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, not exactly the same. I wonder if there's some of the work you all did about the signing up for school in first grade, when we had to have overflow to the other schools, if some of that language might be helpful on the website.
Like the partner school plan.
The partner school plan, because
that's-
it's very clear on the website what happens if you get your form in, if you don't get your form in. So some of that might be a place to continue to draw from.
And I
you
think,
haven't already.
like, partner school, and that was in my head too, because we have the regulations, but we also have an annual plan, which we'll actually talk about today, where we sort of publicize, like, this is the plan for this year, and we could do a similar thing, I think, very easily with this opt-out process. And that would have all the details, we're going to message by March 15th, we need your response by June 30th. Once you're locked in, there's while you can continue to opt out, you'll not be able to opt in between, July 1st and September 30th, because we have to establish runs. And then thereafter, it's sort of an open, consistent with this process, so.
I'm way in the weeds right now. Pull me out, Dr. Yanni. But I wonder about also maybe aligning the timeline to the drop window with the state for enrollment, which I think is October 10th. So then it mirrors the data. Yeah,
I think that keeps it clean.
yeah.
Didn't we say we had a good relationship? And you just said, I think that keeps it clean, yeah.
Getting information earlier than.
The October 10th window being July 1 to October 10th, that would work.
We had discussed giving information in advance to parents so they have an idea of what their expectation for transportation would look like. So when they're opting in or out, they have some frame of reference to say if they want to opt in or opt out. And since this is the first year that we're doing a bell time change, we do have to come up with some, I think like moving forward, we'd have that data. But this first year, it would be hard to get all of that information. We're already in November.
So we talked about, in terms of making the decision, like what information parents would have available to them. So we were preliminarily, without overpromising, looking at establishing like estimated routes, but then also gives parents like the understanding, like, well, this is an estimate. Your run could be any, like if there's adjustments, there's a 15-minute window that if it gets adjusted, it still could be within this window. So at least they have something to review before making that decision. The other sort of internal adjustments that we need to think about, among other things, is the school choice, high school, and moving that up a little bit so that happens before we are making those routes. I mean, there's a lot of layers to how much of an impact this has. And year one will be clunky. I mean, I'm not going to it's not going to be a magical all of a sudden everyone is on the same page, much like partner schooling. I mean, it's evolved. So I do think this is a good place to start. And it, minimally from a transportation lens, I think it gives you that more streamlined data that you're now collecting a little bit like as it comes in. So at least we start the process with a systematic approach to the work.
And just for the recording, I don't know if it matters, but to make the implicit explicit, do you want to explain the October 10th deadline or where I was going with that?
Sure. So we always look at, we do an October 1st snapshot of enrollment, but if kids are not in school on or around October 10th, they wind up getting dropped from the rolls. So it helps us clean up our data there. So I think, to your point and to Megan's point, I think we have a lot of timelines, and the more we can do to bring all of our timelines sort of together to communicate out, because it has the potential to be really confusing for families. So the more clear we can be, I think would serve us well. Put that on the cabinet agenda for next Thursday.
And what we can continue to do, again, this was important feedback for us, is develop that, and I'm looking at Amy as well, that plan. So while we'll have more or less adopted language, we'll bring back the plan to policy for just review and feedback before we, formally push that out. So I think that gives us a work to do between now and the next policy meeting, which I may not be here, but that we can have that ready. And I think that will help us to make sure we are meeting all the deadlines that we need to meet.
Sort of as in that same area, in the last paragraph, where it talks about requesting reinstatement, and the last sort of phrase is, unless special circumstances prevent such reinstitution. I think it would probably be good to be very clear, maybe give some examples. Because what I think is a special circumstance and what someone else thinks is a special circumstance could be very different.
Correct. I think everyone thinks their circumstances are special, so if we can give some examples.
I just drafted it as broadly as possible to give discretion, because I couldn't honestly, because it's a new program, the idea of like, what are some of those special circumstances in my mind, I think, a special circumstance is, as we're instituting this program, it's more like our discretion to say, and maybe there's some better wording to say, as we institute this program, we reserve the right to make some adjustments based on the circumstances and the
I could
timing.
give like an example would be that them opting back in means we have to get another bus active, and then that would take time for
And
us,
driver too.
yeah, to find the driver, the staffing, to support that new need that we didn't have.
So there may just be better language. The intent was to give us the discretion to say that it's not possible under the, again, given the situation that you raised could take some time, because if a lot of people all of a sudden opt back in, that could really throw off some of the numbers and necessitate additional routes, so.
Maybe just take out the word special.
You either perhaps replace special with unforeseeable, and give examples such as, staffing issues, bus unavailability.
I know language is language. I would make a pitch to just keep circumstances, because I think it gives us more discretion to what Katie described, because unforeseen, it is kind of foreseen. We'd have trouble getting a bus, or we'd have trouble getting a driver. Then it gives you all more leeway to.
No, I agree with that.
So take out special and don't give examples? Okay.
Megan's point, like maybe in subsequent years, we'd have more examples to give, but who knows what might come up, and so we can be responsive in alignment with our other policies, I think, keeping it broad.
So if we're done on this,
I just have a quick, can we be consistent about superintendent or designee versus superintendent or their designee?
We talked about that briefly last time, so what's the style guide recommend? I usually just I've been, in recent, I guess, policies, I've been just going superintendent or designee, but then I heard a preference for there, so I started putting that back in. So is there a preference on the part of the committee in terms of that language?
Shocking, I have an opinion. I think I originally pushed to add there because of the, again, great relationship, no problem to figure out. If not the case, just putting designee by not indicating, maybe it's without indicating that the superintendent is the one designating that person, there could be some situation where that becomes problematic, or someone acts as a designee that wasn't the superintendent. So that was my push to add there into the language.
Got it, good point.
Yeah, a lot of them had been he, she, and so I am personally comfortable either way, but I agree with that point too, so.
You can always put on superintendent or superintendent's designee.
Yeah.
If you want to avoid, but
This could be one of those changes that we make in the policies that's not a substantive change.
So there is what we're going to do. It's like I'm looking, everyone's nodding around the room. They're there.
I have one thing to bring up on page 5, the second paragraph. I'm wondering about the late buses. We're silent on that. Yes, as a transportation, will not, sorry, page 50, sorry, yeah. Page 5 of the policy, page 50 of the package.
Yeah, page 5 of the AR, page 50 of the packet.
Yeah.
Page 50, late bus. We're silent on late, we, there is,
Is there,
oh, can someone, would the, in the context of the opt-out?
In the con-
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So I think our perspective and was that this is really the to and from. If you are, would need a late bus, that would still, you would still be able to be on a late bus. You'd still get transportation to and from activities, things like that, that you wouldn't opt out of those other additional runs that are being offered. This is really just to and from school runs. Is that
Okay.
correct?
those things are listed, but late bus is not listed, so I think that should be clarified. Yeah.
Good call, no.
Yeah.
It's in that, et cetera.
On page 53, I have a question. On the, am I understanding that we're taking out the part where a student goes to someone else's home presumably, or to I was thinking, my sense is it happens a lot with kindergarten, or people wanted a lot for for the half care, that if they had a second day part, that they could, get buses.
That's actually covered. It's like a duplicate. That's why it was, so it's already in paragraph.
Thank you. No, I missed it. Okay.
Yeah, for some reason, it's like a duplicative statement, so.
Got it. Okay.
That's why it's being deleted. And there are a couple others where you'll see some deletions that already exist or should exist in other places, like the field trip reference. Like, that doesn't really, in our minds, belong in the transportation policy, because that's not where people are going to look. If they're looking for information about field trips and supervision for field trips, that should be in the field and class trip policy, not in transportation. And that's our recommendation.
Thank you. Is that a large number of kids that do that?
It's consistent number of kids. It's probably maybe 50-ish kids
Okay.
each year, and it's all grades.
Interesting. Thank you.
Just food for thought on that. I wonder about, for those parents that we know already engage in that, you probably were already planning on doing this, but just sending them specifically a reminder if the policy, if like how they, the procedure for how they would opt into it changes, so that they aren't caught off guard if we already know who they are.
So each year, if somebody's opted out, like people do just naturally, so we'll send them an email and say, you haven't used it last year, are you interested in using it this year? That way we can remove numbers. I don't know if we'll have to do it with the opt-in and out program, but with childcare, when we set it up, we do tell them that each year you have to re-request it, because we'll put you back at your home stop, because we don't want to assume we're dropping a student off at a childcare center or a neighbor, and then that's not the case for this year and they've been dropped off somewhere. That's what we've done.
On that page, same page, I know we're not looking at this section really, section 13, the musical instruments and the larger instruments from a equity lens. I'm just wondering, for me, it's reading, if you have a student who doesn't have a parent who can't drive them to school, they can't play these larger instruments. Now, is there arrangements that are being made with the schools that they can store them at school and that?
I think they largely are stored at school. That's not like a day-to-day transportation issue. Again, some of this probably belongs in a different place than in transportation, but certainly I can come back and confirm that, but I am very confident that we make arrangements so there isn't like daily transport anyway for any student who is using or playing a large instrument that's listed here.
And it's in transportation for the safety purposes in this specific area, because larger instruments would block the exit rows. So if there is issue with the bus, it can be evacuated safely. That's why we don't allow backpacks in the aisles and everything has to, just like on a plane, everything has to be stowed away. So, and we don't have storage compartments on our buses for larger instruments.
My limited experience is that those kids have an instrument at home and they have a school one that they're able to use at school.
Yeah, I know that in practice that's what's happening, but the way it's read here, to me, it reads that, unless you can drive or your arrangements, and I'm just wondering if we have this in another spot, is that policy referenced?
So that's what, I was just thinking that either we cross-reference a policy, and I'm trying to think which one would specifically state that piece of it, or just make a notation here along the lines of this shouldn't, this isn't intended to address access to instruments, and that can be found here, or you go to your music teacher or principal to discuss access or something like that, just to say like.
That seems like a reasonable solution.
Okay, are there any other questions from the board? Ally, do you have any questions on transportation? No, thank you, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
both for
Thank you,
being here
guys.
this morning. Makes policy even more exciting when we have guest speakers. Sorry, I'm just having all sorts of ideas now, where to go from here. Policy 705, just as a complement or a follow-up to the changes that were made in 801, and as I mentioned earlier, 705 is intended to reflect the transition of the camera video footage into the AR, and here, which needs a little more adjustment, but because we're in first read to second read, we're going to continue to make sure, and one of the things that I want to make sure that we've done it correctly, because this crosswalk probably should be reviewed by Ken's office, but it was intended to just be a placeholder to show how we're moving that language into 705. The main difference is that we have audio recording on our buses, whereas we don't have that in our buildings. So I just want to make sure that there aren't any additional nuances to that we want, other than that we do notifications that identify areas that are audio recorded as well as video recorded. If there's anything else, just in terms of that process that we want to be attentive to, and just a review by our solicitor, so.
Do all of our buses have video? Oh, sorry.
I believe all of them are equipped with video at this point.
So they have video. Am I making an incorrect assumption that video always includes audio?
On our buses, yes.
Did I mishear? I thought I just heard you say that some of our buses have audio.
Audio, like video audio, like video that captures audio as well as video.
The school cameras.
So,
Thank you, that's what I'm missing.
You said some buses, you said.
Gotcha, thank you.
oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes I like to make sure I'm going to say something clearer than what I just said and not make it more complicated. And we'll have, I'm sure Aldous will be here next time as well, but all bus videos also record audio, and all of our buses are equipped with video and audio.
But our school cameras are only video and not audio. Got it.
Hey, it's me. I know that we are not talking about the actual 705, but I did have two questions that came up in reviewing it. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I wondered about, so like, In thinking about my time on the board and listening to comments and our work around the anti-racism and equity policy and concerns from community members, in reading the safety and security policy 705, I wonder if there is actually an opportunity to integrate that policy language into this as we make decisions and as we communicate and put out and help us define where we respond, where we don't, and where there are protections. Specifically, some of this language around, while balancing the rights and dignity of each and every student to the greatest extent possible. Well, I very much agree on dignity. That word dignity leaves a lot to be interpreted, and some of the comments we're hearing from community members also are like how I might define it might be different than David, might be different than Lucy. So is there actually a way to integrate our actual policy for what we mean when we're talking about students' rights when it comes to their personal being into the safety and security policy so there's no misinterpretation of the intent of the superintendent and the board?
Sure. I wonder, and I think it's more a question back in terms of, I think there's a couple of ways to do it. Off the top of my head is you can incorporate by reference other policies that have, due process rights and our equity stance and, or into this and say like, subject to those policies or something explicit like that. But we could also pull language that just tracks those policies and embed it there to further clarify what we mean when we say dignity of each student, and just use that language and cross-reference. So it's like,
And that's just like dignity is one word in it I used as an example. I think this whole first paragraph could be strengthened by us pulling in the actual policy that's driving it. Because I actually think this entire first paragraph from someone that is not in agreement with some of our other policies or views them differently could be used to say, I am not receiving, my student is not safe because of X, Y, and Z. So, I don't, just
yeah,
a
I think that's
discussion
consistent with the messaging that we've been trying to utilize when we do talk about safety, is like, say, like the crisis response piece is a sliver of what we should be thinking about in terms of overall safety for all students, and that comes with that sense of belonging, investment in community and things like that. So it is like the slice is, depending on how you look at it, small, but we want to make sure that those overarching goals are really what we focus more of our time on. We can certainly come back with some language that may be more, just encompassing of that.
Thanks. And then the other, you unlocked my thinking when you moved much of the transportation to AR versus policy. So in this list that's outlined in the policy in 705, wondering if some of this moves to the AR and or specifically the one that I was most wanting to see updated was creation of a district level threat assessment committee. Like I know from knowing you that the intent would be to continue to utilize that, but just getting more specific in a way.
So you'll see in date adopted of 2019, this policy in 2019 was a new policy. It used to be, like, a lot of these items listed here were separate policies. So it's sort of like what we did with employment. We tried to merge a lot of different things. So, sometimes you hear me talk about, this is version 1. So this is sort of the version 1. And I agree that there are ways for us to update and also probably streamline pieces of it. But it was initially this intent to kind of put everything in one place, and we just haven't gotten back to some of that refinement, but certainly would love to take that on, because I love a good policy project.
But I also think that's where, as a cabinet and maybe even as a principal team, we can work on the AR, because the principals, when, of course they're reading policy, but they're really going to the AR. So to make sure that the AR is comprehensive as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have district level threat assessment committee?
So we're mandated by the Department of Ed to have a threat assessment team in each building.
Just putting it out there, because I've had conversations with people that the policy says this, or I was referred to the policy. I think that we just, when we talk to community members, as, like, when we talk about, just thinking about the transportation, we should say, there's a policy and there's an AR. So a lot of times if they're new, they have a new concern, they don't know something, and they're referred to the policy, they don't necessarily, someone might not necessarily know to also look at the AR. So I just think that we should, that's just a framework, right? That we should think about when we're telling people, well, here's the policy. We should be saying, here's the policy, and then there's also ARs that go along with it.
Anything else on 705 for now? Well, you'll see it again next month. Fear not. Anything on 007? Just, I'll leave it there. Not yet? Okay, sorry. I got ahead of myself. All right. So, switching gears. If that's all right, we'll move on to administrative regulations, 202, non-resident students. On page 95, the changes that are proposed, the change, I should say, that's proposed at, in this policy at page 96.
Regulation.
Oh, I'm sorry. We just talked about that. And here I am using terms incorrectly. The administrative regulation. At the very end of the administrative regulation on page 96, a proposed change to a process that is already embedded here, which allows the district administration to, on a basis, to engage in what would be a re-registration process. And this isn't something that we have done here in the district, but other districts have done it, sometimes at a large scale, which is like an entire re-registration process. Other districts may do it by level, and sometimes in transition years, which is what we're proposing to add as a potential option for us to do a re-registration during transition years was what is meant by grade level. So when students are transitioning from 4th to 5th grade or from 8th to 9th grade, it's an opportunity for us to sort of re-verify residency because other than the practice of the reasonable suspicion that we have under paragraph 2 there, we haven't currently engaged in any sort of uniform re-registration process to, again, verify residency across the district.
We've been talking about this as a superintendent group in the county for about 2 years, and several districts threw out any number of ideas. There are some districts that are going to basically, as Megan said, have every family re-enroll. There are some that are taking the approach that we're proposing here. There are some that are looking at different segments of the population, like renters and whatnot. We were trying to think of the most impartial way to do this. And so, putting our heads together, we think that the most impartial way to do it is at the transition years. The process, we would make it as painless as possible, and we would, set a large time frame for this to happen. So we wouldn't say, you have a week to re-register. We would be talking about several months. And it's just a way to make sure that, in addition to any individual residency concerns that we have to investigate, we just have a checks and balance in place.
Just one follow-up to that. Is there, I know this is something we visited before, right, time to time, and I'm just curious if if there's a suspicion that this is a major problem that needs to be this, system-wide check, kind of, to put the whole community through, re-registering with proof of residence and who they are, and just, I'm not sure, does it require that degree of vigilance, shall I say, or?
So what I understand, and Megan's been here a lot longer than I have, over the last couple of years, the number of residency issues that are coming up, we're starting to get to that point where we feel like we need something more robust than just looking at singular instances. This year, it appears that at our middle level, we're hearing a lot more potential residency issues. That's where it's loudest right now. Again, I often feel conflicted about these types of things because it's like, who do you make the rules for, right? That's why we wouldn't make the process arduous. We would make it as sort of streamlined as possible, because we don't want to make it, we don't want to create in families that we suspect everybody, right? But in trying to think about a way to do it where we're not disproportionately looking at any one population, that we're targeting renters, or we're targeting multiple occupancy families, or we're targeting, any one group. This is, we feel right now, the most impartial way to do that.
I think it also gives us sort of better footing in situations where it doesn't make reasonable suspicion the thing that we utilize to identify non-residency, because sometimes that is the judgment and what one person's reasonable suspicion is. So having a standard where there's a process that everyone goes through, we can say, like, look, everyone has gone through this process. Like, it gives us a way to say, like, you may have reasonable suspicion, but in my estimation, because we've done this process, it's not reasonable under the circumstances. And ideally, it diminishes some of those maybe improper, like, perceptions about residency. That's just based on my experience. But I agree, it's going to be a burden for everyone to have to do that.
I think the part that oh, I'm sorry. I think the part that I struggle with is, if you don't reside in a district and you send your student here and you're breaking the law, right? And so how do we reconcile compliance with the law without having a process in place? And I worked in a district where the reasonable suspicion piece went sideways on us several times, because to Ms. Schaefer's point, what I might consider reasonable suspicion might be very different than what you might think it is. This is an idea we're bringing forward. I mean, if this is not the will of the board or the appetite of the board, we can stick with our current process of reasonable suspicion. I think you're going to hear about this, not just in Lower Merion. Other districts are talking about this now. So we were just bringing it forward really to see what the pulse of, the committee was. And then, if there's an appetite, take it to the board. And if there's not an appetite for it, certainly we can retain our current process.
One thing that would make sense would be how many students are, on a yearly basis, do we find are in violation of the residency requirement? Is it more than, is it de minimis in sense of, just a handful that we're worrying about, or is there really we believe there's a significant number that would require kind of a full scale?
So I think there's some layers to the answer. I think there are cases that come to our attention that we follow through on, and I would say that, that number is probably in the couple dozen, right? That come to our attention, that move forward with enforcement. The other balance to this, just, in terms of having as much information as possible to make this decision about whether we move forward. Again, it's not that we would move forward right now, it's just giving us the option to do that, is that from the standpoint of establishing residency and where it surfaces and how it surfaces, the reestablishment of residency in the district, there are multiple ways to do that. And given the investment that we have in personnel doing that work from a residency investigation standpoint, we don't have the capacity to really manage more than that many cases in a given year anyway. So there's that balance of like how much we can even engage in that paragraph 2 work. Because of the resources that are available to do that. So I answer that with it's sort of because of the resources that we have. I think that number is somewhat dependent on, that I gave you, which is why utilizing something like paragraph 1 gives us a little better assurance of that we're verifying residency larger scale.
On this, and I apologize for taking up time, but does the district maintain records? Every time a new student comes to the district, whether it's from kindergarten or they move into the district, they have to provide proof of residency. Don't we keep that?
So with a renter that provides proof of residency, their rental agreement may be for a fixed period of time, but they don't which is some districts target renters. Like if you have a lease that only lasted 12 months, you have to resubmit the lease. We don't have that as a protocol. So that's another, yes, they do. I'm very confident in our resident registration process that when you register here, you are a resident. I'm very confident of that. It's following that over the years, whether that residency may change. People move into a new home in a different district. I mean, we've had that case that you're in a different, you've moved to Radnor and you're still, you're attending a school because you can get yourself there. But those are some examples of cases that wouldn't otherwise come on our radar because students are just getting to school and attending school, and we don't have any other way of tracking whether that move has happened or not.
I guess that's my follow-up, similarly to David's question. Understanding the recourse or other policies or positions we have in place. So do we have a policy, like if you're a senior and gone to Lower Merion schools your entire life, is it that you can finish at Lower Merion even if you did move to Radnor? Like, do we have an inter-school exchange or district exchange in the state of Pennsylvania? No? Okay, that's Jersey, okay. But just wondering what other options, and like to David's point, I think maybe I'm just thinking about it, but if it's a handful of students and at some point they did provide it, I'm not promoting breaking the law. I'm also just wondering what the end objective is in the student in this, and what other procedures or supports we have in place for if someone's caught. Like, I don't know the end objective. To get them back to their home district?
Okay, do you want to go? Just, if I could share some observations based on my experience in other districts.
Sure.
To David's point, you wouldn't know how many people are in violation until you did this. The default is always going to be renters and people who are on what are called support gratis affidavits. If you don't have a policy that systematically or periodically looks at the folks who came in on deeds, ownership of homes, you're going to have a disproportionate number of renters and people who are in problem, or for whatever reason, are living with somebody other than their parents. That could have a disproportionate impact on certain segments of the population. In other words, you're giving everybody who came in here on a deed a free pass for 12 years, basically. So this is a way to make sure that you're not just ignoring the folks that came in with respect to deeds, and you're not just defaulting to only looking at people whose residency can be challenged because, oh, well, they're renters. Oh, we'll look at them every year or every time their lease is up. Or, oh, they're support gratis. We'll look at them every year. So that's in other districts, have been surprised to find out how many families who came in on deeds were no longer residents. And they would not have known that, but for the fact that they utilized this process. They were getting the renters already. They were getting the folks who were on, dubious support gratis affidavits, but they weren't getting the ones that came in on deeds. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get all that. I think that's exactly my dissonance. That like for us to I understand having the policy to protect us and to be able to deal with like cases that are bubbling up to the level that we are aware of them, to put a procedure in place that's like going after people. The other side of it I think of is the circumstances at which someone lived in our community at some point and then has had such hardship that has had to move out of our community to then like, if they are caught out of here, the disruption in a student's life, like the supporting policies and administrative regulations to say like, you can finish the year or you can do this, like all the downstream impacts. That's the exact dissonance I'm feeling, especially in the economy right now. That is some of the hardest it's ever been. It just feels difficult.
Yeah. Can I don't want to, wanted just to respond to that, because I wrestle with this too, just from that like humanity standpoint, right? That said, we also have, and I think I'm just talking from a district administration standpoint, like our obligation to ensure that our taxpayers are, that tax money is going to district residents. Sometimes it feels, just having been in the seat that I've been as for that length of time, is to ensure that we're meeting the board's objectives of making sure that the taxpayer dollars are earmarked for taxpayers. One of the ways to ensure that is to make sure that non-residents are not benefiting from taxpayer dollars. So I think that's just this is the important conversation to have, so that the administration knows what direction the board would like us to go in doing our best to ensure that. And sometimes just utilizing paragraph 2 doesn't necessarily reach that level of assurance that we're doing that with the greatest amount of fidelity. And so that's why I think part of the reason we've been wrestling with this and needing probably to have this more direction from the board as to how to move forward.
A concern I have is that the district suspects. What prompts that suspicion is, at least I've heard a lot of people say, I saw this kid get on this bus, I saw this kid get dropped off, right? And I actually worry that the suspicion, that there's bias in that suspicion, right? And so this prevents that bias, and so it's like a trade-off, right? And for that reason, like, I would lean towards that this makes sense, understanding all of those other concerns, but I just really feel like that suspicion, or I want you to check on this person, is very biased.
And I agree with you, and my sense is that the whole process gives me pause, but I would think if we were going to have it, that it should be like a policy saying, and I was wondering if the code says anything about establishing residency, but that's part 2, but would be as a policy that you would have when you switch schools, when you go from elementary to middle school, and then when you go from middle school to high school, say, as part of that process, you submit
That's what
You
we're
make-
establishing.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
But it says may at any time require I think it should be more, you do, in order to move schools, you have to establish residency. And, so it's not a discretionary thing.
Right.
It's just a set policy. That's how.
I also think let's say, so this would create a fail-safe, but let's say we find out today that a student doesn't reside in the district. We're not going to tell that family, you're out today. I think I think we can build our administrative regulation around a respectful process to help. It could, I worked in a district that had cut points in the year. Like if you were, approaching the middle of the year, you were able to finish out the year, and then you were disenrolled at the end of the year. If you were a senior, and you had been in the district for several years before that, you got to finish out. So I think we can bring back some more finite language for the board to look at. This is one of those issues that it's hard to talk about because we're talking, like, at the end of the day, our heart's about kids. And so you're trying to wrestle with wanting to take care of kids, but also wanting to maintain structure and order. So why don't we as a cabinet think about putting together some more finite language that we can share with the board?
Yeah, I think I remember, and there's some language around when kids are foster children and and families that become homeless. So I think we could look to that language to support this, because I'm not adverse to what you're suggesting.
Right.
I'm just thinking about the marginal value of which is going to be the greater benefit.
Right.
And which is going to create the most work, and the other thing is that, we're talking about it from, we're looking at renters, but what about, we have a whole real estate website in Montgomery County, and when homes are sold, can't they send a notification? Is there a way, I know it's kind of a surveillance kind of feel, but is there something that the county could do to help all the school districts? Like when a home is sold, you get a notification that this sold, and you see if it matches. And also the other thing is, what's the procedure of when a family does change their address in Power School? And that, are they, I can't remember if we have that somewhere in the policies, but, or administrative regs. They need to reestablish residency with that, and, when that happens?
Yeah, that sparks for me, is there a way to flip the policy or include that in the ARs? It's the responsibility of the family to report. So then if there is, and maybe it already is, but it doesn't happen, but that give a little bit more.
And we do
I
have
can tell you when I moved that we had to re-register, we had to show our deed, we had to show the intent to go to a closing, when did the closing happen? And the school district was very cooperative with helping us with transportation during that time. Like, we would bring our kids to the new house while it was being worked on, and we would get them on the bus there so that they would get accustomed to the new kids.
So there is a process for a change of address. And internally, there is the re-registration and updating the residency as we would with like a new registration. It's the ones that we don't know about that aren't taking that step. And even sometimes within an attendance zone, people don't think like they need to do that because their school hasn't changed, even their transportation may have changed. So when we have notice of that, we follow up directly, either at the school level or our registrar's office. But there is a process for doing that. It's just when people move outside of the district or, again, choose not to share it with us, I can get some more information about how we do some of that tracking. But again, we don't have a huge amount of human resources dedicated to that, just because over time, that's not been a priority.
So we'll work on some more finite language, and I think to the point about bias, I do think there is bias when we say, check out that kid, check out that kid. So trying to find a way that makes it, to remove that bias is going to be really important.
Okay. So I know the arc of the meeting is waning, but the couple that we have left, I think one is a short one, and two would be more like take-home homework for us. Because if we're not going to get it today, we're going to have homework. Just You can write in your thoughts later. But the quick one, I think, could spark some discussion, but the regulation 206-4 on page 97, we've had some conversation about class sizes, building sizes, and an opportunity to potentially expand our partner school program beyond just elementary. So the idea would be, again, like we talked about earlier, having that plan that we review annually, we would come back with that. But the idea would potentially, aligned with what we've done at elementary level, give us the ability at other levels to say for new registrations, we would have discretion administratively to assign to a non-homeschool building to serve the purpose of, maintaining class sizes, building capacity, guidelines, staffing, availability, and facility general availability. So that would potentially, our proposal would be to give the administration the ability to incorporate that language at other levels, again, which would be part of the plan that we would share with the board publicly.
I had two comments on this one. One, I wondered about mirroring the language we use in the transportation instead of middle or high school to secondary school for consistency. And then my other one, and I just don't know the answer to this, are parents able at the middle school level, able to request a different middle school? And if we are going this route, would we consider doing that? So it's a little bit reciprocal.
So we have a regulation about requests for an attendance area exception, and that would be the only way at this point that anyone outside of this process would be able to ask for a school other than their home school. And we've talked about, if that works for us, if you requested it, but we don't have a program right now that does that, no, other than to meet the criteria for an attendance area exception.
It's interesting, I think some of this, I would assume behind some of this, or our desire to, is some of the programs we're bringing online with full day K, with other transitions. I also wonder if there's an opportunity, and I'm going to throw a firebomb into the policy, and thinking about Oakwell and some of the sports, if we don't move forward with using the property, some of the concerns we've heard with families, having a way that if that was a major concern, transportation, being able to opt into a different secondary school that meets your needs more could be a possible thing to consider. I know we don't have the data to support it, but since we're asking families to give up their right to have their home school, having a reciprocal process to have them be able to ask for accommodation, it's something top of mind.
I think that's something we should consider as we're thinking through what that plan looks like. If there are opportunities for volunteers, sort of, or by the nature of what they're looking for. I think the other complication, though, becomes, so with attendance area exceptions right now, transportation is not provided. So opening that up, I think that would also generate the question of the transport piece. So we'll have to think through that impact as well, but I don't.
Yeah, I'd just be curious, it could say the same, like, it would also help give us some data about how many parents are really concerned, because you're giving up a lot at the middle school, any secondary level. That's a big decision to make. So it would be curious how parents would be thinking about it.
Just in response, if I'm not correct, I think anyone is still permitted to choose Harrington. So they have that choice. But on the partner school, excuse me.
Sorry, David, but permitted to choose Harrington, and part of that thinking is because the IB is there, right? So subsequently, you could apply that same standard to certain programs being offered in certain middle schools that aren't in others, which could be a stopgap to resolving some of the tensions in the community around other issues right now.
True. It's also, I think, because they, well, whatever. Absolutely. But the other question I had the regulation or for elementary schools, it's classroom by classroom. And in middle school or high school, the kids are moving from classroom to classroom. So how does that work? I mean, what do you envision?
Yeah, I think it's more, and I mean, we could incorporate those, more of those details, but I think it would have to be, my thinking is it's a blanket decision at the beginning of the year based on like overall capacity, as well as we look at staffing, for example, in which we start to do that now for next year, we start to see where there are challenges in maintaining ideal class sizes at the secondary level, even though it is like sort of an average, but you can see that, for example, the sciences, if there's, not, our current staffing together with the projected enrollment looks like we need 3 or 4 more sections, i.e. a new teacher, that in order to kind of manage that projected growth more broadly, again, it's not I don't think a science, but it's an art in science, is to say, for example, Lower Merion at, pushing 1,700, where the idea was to have, equivalent sized schools. Do we say for the 23, 24, which is this year, 24, 25 school year, all new registrations at the high school level will be, assigned to Harriton, again, because we have a bus system that already serves Harriton, across the district, that it would allow us to perhaps, and I'm not saying a major impact, but over time may help minimize some of the growth needs, especially for facilities that we have, that were projected for Lower Merion. So again, to answer your question, you're right, it's not like an exact number across all high schools, but I think it's more of what we're seeing in terms of the growth and needs, staffing and facility-wise at Lower Merion specifically.
I would be very curious over the next several years to see if there's a trend in kids at Black Rock having a higher percentage choosing Harriton than they currently do. Like, and not the Gladwin kids, specifically the Penwood kids, right? To see, because the enrollment issue at LM High School is, it's huge, it's an issue, right? So I've thought that since we opened up the new middle school, or that we were opening that, if that will help provide a little bit of soften the pressure on Lower Merion if you have more kids going to Harriton.
Yeah, that's something we're monitoring as well. So again, this isn't going to relieve all of the pressure, but another way that we can try to manage some of the growth. So we'll bring this back anyway to talk about the partner school program. So if we are okay with that consideration in our planning, we can bring that back for further discussion as well, what that would look like in implementation at a secondary level. And as for homework, sorry.
Just one other quick question on that. It might, excuse me, the choice zone
Yes.
would have some impact on that as well. And I was curious how the numbers are breaking down on the choice zone. I mean, you don't have to know today, but I mean, that's in terms of Harriton and LM.
I don't have that data in front of me, but we certainly can make that available as part of this conversation. Just finally, to wrap it up and sort of where I started and punted, 151, page 99 represents some thinking around how we begin to merge the athletics policy and the activities policy. So there's some proposed language that we'll use as a starting point. So think about it from that lens, and then the vision would be the administrative regulations would represent like student athletics, activities, and where there are some, nuance because of PIAA rules, those would be listed in the regulation applicable to athletics and so on. So the intent is to say we offer activities and we should have a variety of activities, and those should be aligned with some of our other priorities and goals in the district. So that was the lens through which this was drafted. So we'd like to sort of build on that moving forward, but open for your thoughts and considerations. And this is your homework.
So I think that's great. I think that I've long felt that they should be more integrated and not so separate. That's why I've pushed for, the AD is not athletics, but it's also activities. I would, in the name of the policy or in the text, specifically say sports, because people are going to come out and they're going to look for sports, and they're not going to necessarily, I think, in many people's minds, sports and extracurriculars are separate, and just so that it's clear that it includes both.
Put it in parentheses, including athletics.
Somehow, something.
The regulations will make that clear because there'll be a separate regulation, one for athletics, one for extracurriculars. So it'll be clear from the regulation.
But to my comment earlier, people don't necessarily know that ARs exist. They only, they'll go to a policy and they don't necessarily know that ARs exist. So just that the policy should make sure that it's clear that it encompasses both.
I think this is a good time to break.
This is our homework, or we're talking about it now?
Well, I could talk about this all day, but I know people have things to do, places to be. So I just think this is a good place to break because we can bring back next time, sort of more substance behind this. But please feel free to give me a call, send me an email, we can chat offline.
Ally, do you have any public comment on any of the policies we discussed? No. Okay, thank you. Ken, do you want to summarize where we are?
Yes, happy to. There was a small change made to the policy 007 regarding, unless advertised otherwise as to where the meetings would be held. We have the 007, we've also deleted some language regarding editing of video recording and renumbered all the paragraphs. With respect to school day for students, that's going to be approved as written. With respect to policy 705, there's going to be, bring that back to include some language on equity. Student athletics doesn't require a new first reading, it's already been adopted. Transportation, I believe we did make some minor changes, but that'll be okay that'll be put up for first reading. And the AR 2202 is going to be brought back after some further review, similar to 206-4, and you all have your homework on 151.
Thank you so much. And Lucy and I are bidding everyone a farewell. This is our last policy committee meeting. So, did you have anything to add?
Just that I've been coming to these meetings since 2014, so it's a little weird that my Friday mornings are going to be free.
Yeah.
You don't,
Yeah.
you can still come, you just aren't coming as board members.
I'm going to be on the beach for the next board meeting, so.
Yes, of course, since 2008.
Wow, I just want to thank all three of you, David, Suba, and Lucy, for your service on the board and the committee. I feel like this meeting is really robust, and we've done really exciting stuff over the past few years, and your legacy will make a mark. And David, it's also been helpful having you in the interim and being able to go back. I've learned a lot from each of you. I know Mel has too, and just, we'll miss you. So please, feel free. This is the most fun committee, and
Agreed.
we'll see you then.
Come visit us, come visit us, we'd like that.
Thank you, everyone. We bid you adieu.